Another disaster drama struck in 2024. A volcanic eruption occurred on a tourist island, and volcanic ash spewed out all over the sky. To make matters worse, a strong earthquake triggered a super tsunami. Tourists on the island faced a hell mode survival challenge. Without further ado, the main movie began, with several tourists playing on a yacht. Suddenly, thick white smoke rose from the sea. The woman was horrified to find that her companion who had just jumped into the sea had disappeared. After a while, the sea surface seemed to be boiling and began to bubble crazily. It was too late for the tourists to escape. The scene turned and Derek's family came to La Palma Island for vacation. This is a famous tourist destination in Norway. Every year, a large number of tourists come to visit and check out the beautiful coastline. Derek's family couldn't help but praise them again and again. Little did he know that an unusual and unprecedented natural disaster was about to come to the canyon deep in the island. Geologist Mary and her partner were walking in the rising mist. It turned out that there was an active volcano in the center of the island. Although it had been dormant for decades, however, the internal movement has not stopped. Horsepower comes here every half a month to explore. However, this time it is a little different from the past. A large number of water drops inexplicably seep out of the rock wall. Mary picked up some and prepared to take them back for testing. Then she saw many bat corpses lying on the ground. Her partner casually measured the carbon dioxide concentration here. It was extremely high. When she shined the light upward, she discovered that there was an extra crack on the roof of the cave at some point. Inside the Institute of Geology of La Palma, Director Vero saw a piece of news. A shipwreck occurred on the southeast side of the island. 7 tourists on the cruise ship were not spared. Just when he felt vaguely uneasy, Mary and her partner brought discoveries in the volcanic area. Various signs indicated that the volcano on the island was recovering. He suggested reminding the islanders as soon as possible to prepare for emergencies. The director was a little nervous after reading the data, but he had his own considerations. The volcano on the island was moving every day, and the crack was not formed in a day. If an alarm is issued based on these alone, it will inevitably cause panic among the islanders. Don't forget that it is the peak tourist season. After careful consideration, the director decided to let Molly install monitoring equipment to keep an eye on the changes in the volcano. However, the partner is also worried that there is a crack several kilometers on the seaside of the volcano. If it erupts again, half of the mountainside will slide into the sea, which may trigger a very large tsunami. In the middle of the sea in Mali Xinjiang, shouldn't the islanders have to be notified immediately to evacuate? But he didn't want his partner to let out a long sigh. It makes sense that the director didn't dare to act rashly, because he had made a mistake a few years ago. At that time, a geologist also noticed signs of activity on the volcano, and the director immediately issued an emergency evacuation note. As a result, the islanders waited for several weeks for the volcano to appear, but nothing happened. They are still complaining about the director, causing them to lose a summer's tourism income. The Derrico family was enjoying the beautiful scenery at the beach and did not know that the crisis was approaching step by step. Until they realized that their youngest son was missing for no apparent reason, the family hurriedly stopped the entertainment and hurriedly searched around. Finally, they found the other person's figure on a rock. The little boy stood there stupidly, staring straight at the sea. A large number of sea turtles swam in groups towards the middle of the sea. You must know that this is the habitat of sea turtles. What made them abandon their nests? And the horsepower here analyzed the water samples in the volcanic cave and found that there were no minerals in them. In other words, the water did not seep out from the soil. It was because of the condensation of water vapor due to temperature changes in a cave. In order to collect more data, he and his partner rushed to the volcanic area again and crossed the road made of volcanic ash. The two were going to install several monitoring instruments in the crater. However, just halfway up the mountain, they found a new crack in the middle of the mountain, although it didn't look very big. God knows whether it will continue to grow. Just when the two were installing monitoring instruments, colleagues from the Geological Bureau were horrified to find that the temperature inside the mountain was rising rapidly. The director hurriedly called Mary and asked her to evacuate with her partner. However, the call was not hung up yet. A large amount of white smoke erupted from the crack. The two grabbed their backpacks and ran away. Unexpectedly, they encountered several passengers on the way. Mary could only stop and ask them to leave quickly. The result was such a delay. The smoke in the heart of the mountain became thicker and thicker. He held his nose and ran all the way. In panic, he accidentally rolled down the hillside. When she woke up from the coma, she found that she was lying on the hospital bed. Mary looked out the window nervously and found that it was peaceful outside. The director was sitting on the bench in the corridor. She was glad that there was no volcanic eruption yesterday, and the white mist was just the volcano releasing pressure. Now the internal pressure of the mountain is far below the warning line, so he did not issue an emergency evacuation notice. But Mary, as a geological expert, clearly knows that once the volcano releases pressure, it means the arrival of the explosive device. However, the cautious director rejected Molly's proposal. He was worried that the own incident a few years ago would happen again. Neither party could convince the other, so the two had to go to the city hall. The matter was reported to the mayor's secretary, but the latter's views were consistent with the director's. The director could not make the islanders and tourists panic based on subjective speculation. The director finally came up with a compromise plan. He would always pay attention to the volcano's dynamics and report all the data. The specific how to do it would be decided by the top management, but Mary felt that this was too much of a waste of time. The volcano on the island could erupt at any time. The first thing she thought of was that her brother repeatedly told him to buy the nearest ticket and leave the island. When Mary returned to the monitoring center again, she found that the internal pressure of the volcano was soaring rapidly and the surrounding rocks were also shaking violently. She realized that the volcano was about to erupt soon. The director felt nervous and asked his assistant to immediately notify the municipal government to issue an evacuation notice. But it seemed too late to do so now. A passenger plane was preparing to take off on the runway. A large amount of smoke suddenly erupted from the crater. When the captain received the notice to cancel the flight, the plane had already left the runway and flew into the sky. Seeing that the swollen volcano was getting closer and closer, the captain could only change the direction as much as possible. Unfortunately, he still couldn't. Derek's family was still having a meal in the hotel when they inexplicably saw a passenger plane passing overhead, crossing its tail, trailing long flames, and then plummeting into the sky. To prevent all tourists from screaming out, including the mayor's secretary, everyone realized that the disaster was coming. The mayor personally contacted the director of geology and said that after detailed analysis of the data, the expert team said that the volcanic eruption would subside within a few hours. So the director's application for emergency evacuation was rejected, and the latter was almost speechless. Didn't anyone pay attention to the cracks on the volcano? If a landslide occurs, it is very likely to trigger a very large tsunami. But this reminder was selectively ignored by the mayor because there were still thousands of tourists on the island, and no one could afford the losses caused by the emergency evacuation. The director seemed to have aged decades instantly and ordered his subordinates to take their families and leave the island quickly. And he happened to stay and continue to monitor the volcano data. Molly did not refuse and immediately returned home. However, he saw his younger brother was arrested by the police for drinking and causing trouble. He told the story of the disaster caused by the volcanic eruption. However, the police did not receive the evacuation notice and instead arrested Mary on charges of spreading rumors. To everyone's surprise, the volcano actually stopped erupting just as the expert team expected within a few hours. The tourists continued to enjoy an extremely comfortable vacation. Fortunately, Derek's wife's brother worked in the emergency command office and learned that all flights to and from La Palma Island were canceled. He was very keenly aware that something big was going to happen there, so he quietly called Derek's wife to remind him. Let him take the ferry and leave the island as soon as possible. Derek knew that this uncle was very reliable and immediately returned to the hotel to pack his luggage. When he was about to take a taxi to the pier, he found that there were very few taxis. At this time, Derek saw a van parked on the side of the road with the engine turned off. The driver was carrying goods in the distance. Fearing that his family would get in the car quickly, he stepped on the accelerator and drove towards the dock quickly. About 10 minutes later, Derek's family finally arrived at their destination. From a distance, they saw a ferry about to depart. A few people were about to get off the bus, but the driver unexpectedly chased them. Derek asked his family to get on the boat quickly, while he stayed to fend off the pursuers. After receiving a fat beating and losing a large amount of money, Derek learned that driving from the hotel to the pier was only possible if he didn't pass through the community. It would be slower. The man wanted to die, especially after he hurried to the pier, but he found that Duran had already set off. Derek could only watch his family leave him. However, he did not give up and prepared to rent a boat to catch up with his family. But at this moment, an emergency evacuation alarm sounded in the air. It turned out that the director detected that the pressure inside the volcano was soaring again. This time he did not ask the mayor for instructions, but directly issued an evacuation warning. Derek almost spat out a mouthful of blood because the rental boat salesman was notified by the company to stop all operations. Fortunately, at this time he met a kind-hearted islander. There was still an empty seat on the other party's yacht, but before he could even get on the boat, a loud noise came from the distance. The volcano on the island finally erupted. The scale of this eruption was obviously larger than yesterday. Many tourists were frightened and fled in panic. Mary's brother rushed to the police station as soon as he heard the noise. He was thinking about how to rescue his arrested sister. As a result, these police officers just threw away the keys and ran away. The younger brother rushed to open the door of the cell where Mary was detained. Before leaving, they released the criminals next door. Looking at the erupting volcano, Mary was about to take her younger brother to the pier, but was stopped by Derek on the roadside. He said that there was no ship in the pier now. Derek had finally squeezed into the last yacht and was about to sail when a mother with her child suddenly walked up from the shore. Unfortunately, there were no extra seats on the boat. Derek was worried. Molly's brother suddenly spoke. He hit a boat on the beach, and the group hurried to the seaside on the back of the volcano. Sure enough, there was a speedboat parked here, but just as they untied the rope, a gunshot sounded from behind. The person who came turned out to be the criminal that Mary let go before. She asked a few people to let the boat out. Several of her companions needed to use their brothers. Unwilling to do so, they rushed up quickly and prepared to grab the gun. However, they were hit hard in the abdomen and fell to the ground. Derek also risked his life for the sake of his family. He fought with the gangster with all his might. When he was beaten so hard that he couldn't lift his head, he grabbed a rock and threw it at the opponent's head. He finally managed to finish off his opponent. Several of the gangster's companions also rushed over. Derek could only forcefully pull up the grieving Mary. He used a pistol to drive away the chasing people. At this time, Mary also regained some sense and hurriedly started the speedboat and headed towards the depths of the sea. At this time, Derek's wife and children had already arrived at the island next door. They were very lucky to catch the last flight, but when they were about to board the plane, their daughter Sarah accidentally saw her best friend stranded at the airport. She asked her mother to take her brother on the plane first, and she quickly ran over and gave up the boarding pass reserved for her father. The two friends finally boarded the plane as they wished, but they didn't expect that the mother could not see her daughter for a long time and ran off the plane to look for someone. As a result, the mother and daughter missed each other perfectly. It's too late to run away now. He could only return to his most familiar place, the director of the Geological Bureau. He met his partner and smiled. The two put on protective suits and came to the hot crater to look at the surging magma. The director's face was full of annoyance. If I had been more decisive at that time, maybe so many people would not have suffered such a hopeless disaster. My partner took out a bottle of red wine from his arms and prepared to welcome death heroically. But just as he raised the glass, his body suddenly shook violently. As the crack rapidly extended, half of the mountain actually slid to the bottom of the sea. A huge wave was forming. Derek and Mary on the other side had just landed on the island next door. Suddenly, she heard a rumbling sound in the distance, followed by an invisible wave of air coming towards her. Mary quickly took out her telescope. The tsunami she was most worried about was still coming. The huge cruise ship, in the eyes of ordinary people, was just a leaf in front of Tianwei. Just when the two fell into despair, their mobile phones in their pockets suddenly received a text message, which included a coordinate indicating that it was the only safe place. It turned out that just 10 minutes ago, a wave expert calculated the tsunami formed by the La Palma volcano based on data. Although terrifying, but the special shape of the island next door can withstand some of the impact, creating a small vacuum zone on the back that can provide shelter for the residents of the island. Derek's uncle immediately sent the coordinates to everyone's mobile phones. Derek discovered that the shelter was not far from here, so he powered up and set off again, but the huge waves were already visible to the naked eye. Beads of sweat oozed from their foreheads. They were fighting for time with death. At this time, Derek's wife, who was stranded at the airport, also received a text message. He wanted to call his daughter on the plane, but found that his cell phone suddenly lost signal. The captain in the plane sensed that a huge wave was about to hit. He could only turn the power to the maximum, but he still underestimated the speed of the tsunami. The passengers didn't have time to call for help, and the huge volume swallowed the entire plane. Derek's wife and children were lucky enough to meet kind-hearted staff at the airport that day. The group got into the car early and arrived at the safe area before the waves hit. And here, Derek and Mary were still racing against death. A huge wave hundreds of meters high was behind them. The speedboat was running fast and smoking. However, they desperately found that there was a huge wave rushing in front of them. Fortunately, there was a canyon not far ahead. Derek made a sharp turn. The next moment, the huge energy contained in the two huge waves collided with each other. The two looked at this scene in disbelief and marveled at how insignificant human beings are in front of nature. Derek hurried to the beach and found that many survivors had gathered here. After asking several passers-by in succession, it was confirmed that the airport had been destroyed. Derek was immersed in the pain of losing his family. The next moment, he heard someone shouting. When he turned around, he saw that it was his wife and children who had also escaped. On the other side, Derek's daughter woke up from a coma at the airport. She pulled her best friend out of the broken cabin and was completely shocked by the scene in front of her. It didn't take long for official rescue to arrive. Derek's family was miraculously reunited after the tsunami. The above is all the contents of Escape from Volcanic Island. Friends who like it, please continue to pay attention, and we'll see you in the next issue.